Good morning and welcome. Welcome to the Safety Action July webinar. I'm Gary Rowe, your host today. My colleague Andrea Rowe has got a sore throat. She's in the background with us, but not able to speak too well. So we'll give her voice a rest this morning. Thank you for joining us. Today, what I'd like to cover with you is the Australian Institute of Health and Safety's conference. It was held last month on the Gold Coast. I attended that and I found it very interesting. It's going to be in two parts because there's just so much in it. I can't share it with you all this morning. So next month we'll share part two. So I'm going to give you the highlights that I saw. Now, different people would have attended different sessions and have different background and experience. So bear with me. It'll be Gary Rowe's highlights, what jumped out to me and I thought might be of interest to you. Combined with that conference was what I call the Dreamworld experience. We'll explain that shortly. Personal heaters in winter. So here we are, particularly in the southern states, feeling the cold more so than up north. And occasionally we have people bringing their own heaters into work. Is this a good thing? And if it is okay, what do we need to do about it? And the other one, if I may, is pedestrian exclusion zones around mobile plant. As I mentioned to Andrea earlier this morning, this comes up repeatedly. So we just want to share the latest experience and prosecution in this area and what it means for people, both you and I as pedestrians, or we might walk onto a site or wherever that may be, or it could be that it's part of your business and you have either forklifts, telehandlers, or truck deliveries, loading and unloading. So this is what we'll look at today. But before we get into those, for those who attend regularly, you'll know I like a question of the week. So today, question 1A, and there'll be a 1B below. Do your contractors need professional indemnity insurance, PI insurance, or public liability, often called PL insurance? And if so, how much coverage is required of either PL or PI insurance? So there's, if you like, the first question. I've got two questions today. The second one is, are your workers covered by the Victorian Workers' Compensation Policy if they travel interstate or overseas? So it's quite a good question because if your company's based in Victoria, it'll have a Victorian Workers' Compensation policy. But like many of us, we periodically or occasionally or even regularly travel interstate and even overseas. And if you get injured at work, would you still have workers' compensation insurance paid out of that Victorian workers' compensation policy? Will it respond and deliver the same benefits to you or your team? So there's the two questions. We'll come back to these at the end of today's session. So coming to the safety conference from the Safety Institute of Australia, which was held up on the Gold Coast this year. I think it's being held in Adelaide next year. I can't recall, but anyway, let's look at today's bits. So the first session was delivered with the topic, the art of presenting. And, you know, many of us have experienced very boring safety presentations. Now, bear with me, I am a full-time safety professional and have been so for over 30 years. So I can be guilty of this as well. So I'm not trying to step back and say I've never done this or inflicted some session on people that were not always interested or engaged. But let's just take it on board and say, yes, we have all experienced some session that we've felt boring or whatever. So what the presenter in this case said, don't blame the audience. If you think they're not engaged, they're not interesting, they're not looking up, they're looking at their iPhones or whatever, don't blame them. And the other thing is, if you think they've heard the message, I've told them type of thing, the practical thing is you need to tell them 5 to 7 times the same simple message before you can actually say, I believe they've now heard it. So, and you might think, oh, gee, do we have to be repetitive? Do we get boring by repeating the statement? Think of advertisements. Every one of us watches television at some time. And so what you'll find is that yeah, some ads can be annoying, but some are actually quite amusing. The good ones are amusing ads, and they get repeated over and over. And you will have seen them more than 5 or 7 times, and you're still not necessarily annoyed or bored with them. So don't think because you're telling somebody something 5 or 7 times that may be a problem. And so be prepared to look at that. And I'm just seeing if there's any questions coming in on today's session. I'll try and do my best with anyone who's got questions in the chat area of our webinar, but I'm facilitating on my own today, and I usually have one of the team just help me out and remind me or prompt me to anything that I need to tell you. And so the typical thing just to watch out for is too many slides. And I'm an engineer and I'm visual, and I like to show things visually, including words. And I absorb the words better than when I hear them. When I've seen them on a slide, I do absorb them. So when I say too many slides can be a problem, you've got to take that in the context of your circumstance. But too much text on slides, presenter going off topic, going over time, monotone speaking slowly can bore people as well, or too fast, and therefore we can't keep up with it, and I can't recall what the person said a few moments ago. So bear with me. These are what some of the presenter explained, and I smiled. I said, I've seen and heard all of these things. So and some people use jargon, which is great for their industry because we all have acronyms and we all have certain titles and terminology for things. But if you're speaking to a broader audience, just be aware they may not know any of those abbreviations. So we need to explain those. And I'm guilty of this. Occasionally, I try and put the full word before I ever use an abbreviation in my articles or text, but occasionally I forget, and I assume everyone knows OHS. And everyone here probably does, occupational health and safety. But occasionally there'll be a senior manager or a manager from overseas who's not familiar with our terms for workplace safety. So there we go. So we now know the typical problem. Moving forward, what they explained was, one, be authentic. And that is, they said, don't try and change yourself to do a better presentation. You're good. You're a good person. You've got to believe that. So be authentic and be yourself. But what you're going to be conscious of are those things that I've just mentioned. And they said it helps if you can actually turn it from a one-way presentation into a two-way conversation. Now, obviously, if you're at a major conference, it's going to be largely one way. But most of us aren't speaking at large conferences. These are amongst our team meetings, toolbox talks, in the field, chatting to people. It can be two-way, and it should be. Keep it simple. So you may have 20 things that they need to know about machine guarding, or 25 things they need to know about contractor management. But I'm sorry, people can't remember that. You're going to have to work out how to simplify that down so it's cookbook recipe, and maybe it's 3 or 5 key things that cover those aspects. Or if you get those 3 or 5 things drilled in, that's great. You can now move on to the other things that you've missed at a later date. So don't try and think you have to teach somebody 125 points right now and they've got to absorb them all. It might be we do 5 points today, 5 points next week, and so on. So that could be the way through it. And the other one, which you've no doubt heard, is that people relate to stories that link to what you're telling them. So examples and stories will actually embed in the mind much better and stronger with your audience. And as we've already mentioned, caution with slides, and I'm guilty of that. You'll see that this morning. I have a number of slides to share with you. So that was the first bit at the conference, was just about presentation. And given that I've said it right at the start, we have all experienced very boring safety presentations or safety talks. So maybe we can now all take this on board and say, right, for me and my colleagues, how can we make some step change in this area? So the next topic was on good communication. And I'm just listing some of the negative things here, if I may. And what they said is, don't assume that workers have similar motivation and ability and risk tolerance that you and I have. And I think when I saw this, I immediately rang true, because I think for many years I have simply made that assumption. I've actually spoken to people and just assumed they share the same values that I do, the same interests that I do, and therefore they will be interested in safety. And so clearly not. Don't assume there's only one way to control a hazard. And this was another really insightful thought. Almost every corporation, every business that I've worked with, large and small corporations, have got procedures, whether they call them SOPs or SWIMs or whatever you want. They've got a procedure and say, this is how you do this job. This is it. One, boom, boom, boom. And so therefore it presumes there's only one way to control the hazard. So some of the communication experts are now starting to challenge this. And it's not just the speaker on this good communication, it's technical authors like Andrew Hopkins and others, and Sidney Dekker have made the same observations. There's more than one way to control a hazard. You may well prescribe one in your business for good reason, but you need to understand, are you prescribing it one way for good reason, or is that just how your mind works, that there's only one way? So I thought that was just an insightful little comment. Don't assume 100% retention. We all do safety training for our team, and we've trained them, and people challenge us. We go, yep, they've done the training. Here's the content. Well, we shouldn't assume everything in the content of that training is now in the minds and accepted by the team. So don't assume 100% retention. The assumption is we need to control the workforce, which once again, most major businesses, larger corporations, have policies and procedures very precisely worked out for almost everything to guide almost every task and operation. So that's how we controlling the workforce. Most of us are not in that environment, and we're somewhat less, we don't have the resource to do that. But our mindset shouldn't be that we're going to control the workforce, that they are part of our team, they're a critical part of running our business. They're good people. So if they make a mistake, why is that? And what else can we do to help them to actually perform the work safely and efficiently? And don't assume your workers will speak up. Everyone assumes, well, we told them if there's a problem, stop and tell us. Very few workers tend to do that. They actually are confronted with a challenge or a difficulty. Something's different today. The equipment's not working 100% correctly. The task, for whatever reason, is not what I'm used to. And they, like all of us at home, doing a task at home, we work our way around it, and we just try and find how we actually deal with that. So there's a couple of things just to watch out for with good communication. So these are obviously, I've listed here what you might describe as the negative things. Don't assume these things. So part of good communication will be reversing it. And some other things that I thought was interesting, and you will know this immediately the moment I say it, is over the last 25 years, there's been a huge amount of change. So we've had information scarcity. So 30 odd years ago, when I was a safety engineer at the Department of Agriculture, it was difficult to get technical information on safety. You had to buy lots and lots of books, journals, articles, everything was hard copy. And then you had to hunt through it to find it, because in hard copy, it's not even electronic search. So today we have information overload. And now we'll come to later, can we trust all the sources that we've got? So we've got lots of information, but not all of it is accurate, but we've got lots of information. We previously had limited choice in whatever that may mean, either of product, services, sources of information. Now we have almost endless choices. If you think back, and I think it only a few years ago, because if you think of the news at the moment, we had faith in key institutions. Now, whether that was the Catholic Church, whether it was the Commonwealth Bank, whether it was some other organisation, we tended to have faith in them. And a lot of this has been shaken of recent times. And so there's probably embedded in our organisations and in our people these days institutional distrust rather than, so our presumption is these days we don't trust them until proven different instead of the other way around, I think. And we had a culture in the business because all the source of information was limited and it came through primarily supervisors, managers, the company. Today, every worker can get all their own information on the same task, same equipment, same machinery, and political views and other community views from all the sources that are electronically available, internet, etc. So we've now got a codeless culture. So don't assume you've got the same close-knit culture. It's not as easy to build these days as it was, say, 20, 25 years ago. I thought this was rather interesting. So another speaker at the conference had headed up an Antarctic expedition, or not an expedition, but a group down to Antarctica with Australia, and did the winter stint, which is a long stint where there is no way out. There's no ships coming in, and even if something happens to the team, ill health or injury, no planes can get in or out through the coldest, darkest winter months into where they are based. And so it was really important that how the people look after each other and treat each other. And from my mind, and I may be wrong, but the traditional HR approach or principle was harmony. Whatever we do, stop the fighting. The disagreements. We've just got to stop that. And what they said was, no, respect beats harmony every time. So what we want is respect first. If the fact we've got a little bit of disharmony in the group and disagreement, so be it in the short term. But what is mandatory and we insist on is we respect each other. So that's a starting principle, not harmony. And possibly in families, we forgive people being naughty and doing the wrong thing, and then they keep doing it over and over and over because what we put first was harmony and not respect. And the people doing the wrong thing have got to respect the rest of the family, their colleagues, and the business that's paying for them and providing their career. So talk to people, not about them, is a good starting point. So how many people in your business come to you and start to tell you stories about somebody else in the business? And you might say, have you spoken to them yet because you're unhappy with their behaviour? So there's a test point. So maybe just simply say, gee, I need to speak to that person. And I think it's Malcolm Gladwell in one of his books, Talking to Strangers. There's a statement, I don't like that person. I must get to know him better. And maybe it's my wry sense of humour, but I love that statement because it never occurred to me that I'd want to do that. And it probably never occurred to you that you'd want to get to know somebody you don't like either. But if you understand what he was trying to get at is better communication. Not that you have to like that person, but he's going to try and get to know him better. So employ people. This is what they do for the Antarctic group. Employ people for their personal attributes first, and then train them in all the technical skills they will need while they're down there in Antarctica, which is everything from firefighting to stepping in to help out with medical procedures. I think, was it the carpenter or electrician was the assistant anaesthetist, and a couple of the carpenters were assistant surgery assistants if anyone needed surgery down there from the doctor. So that's what they do. They employ for personal attributes and then say, okay, what other training and technical skills do we need to provide them? And I like this one, and I see this in some good businesses. Find opportunity for small, regular celebrations of what we have achieved. Because we whip ourselves all the time. We need more. We've got to do better. There's been an incident. That's all true, and we need to deal with those. But you know what? There's a lot of good stuff happening and people don't hear that much. So you may have heard the principle 4-to-1 rule, 4 positives for every negative. I think this fits in that. So find the opportunity for small, regular celebrations and have some fun. So one of the ones experiences I want to share with you was Dreamworld was brave enough to host 700 safety specialists from the conference. That's pretty brave to get them come to your park, give everyone a free pass across the entire park and all the rides. But we actually had a challenge as well. So we had a series of questions and things to find at different points around the park. So 700 people prowling around the park and looking at things, challenging signage, behaviours, practices, barriers, safety, guarding, whatever it happened to be, looking at it. And so, yeah, there was the fun challenge that went with it. And those who wanted to go on certain rides went on it or a few times. That was nice. At the end of the, if you like, the activity, the 700 delegates convened in their major conference room at Dreamworld, and the executive team, I believe there were 4 of them, was on stage for close to 2 hours taking questions and, if you like, being grilled by 700 safety specialists over the terrible fatalities that occurred at the park back in 2016, when I think it was either 3 or 4 guests were killed on the Rapid River Thunder Ride, I think it was called. And so a terrible, terrible event. And what one of the executives explained is almost every family in Australia has a photo from Dreamworld and possibly from the Rapid River Ride. And so, you know, that gave them a terrible feeling. And the executive said they felt that they had lost the social license to operate as a result of that accident. And they understood it and felt terrible about it. And by the way, the executives on stage, none of them were actually at Dreamworld at the time of the accident. So they did not control the business. They didn't control the procedures or the maintenance or anything else. However, they represent the business, and they came in very soon after that accident to rebuild a lot of what they were doing in the park. I thought it was very brave of them. I thought they were extremely open and genuine about their concern. But some of the interesting things I found as a safety specialist is the new CEO, she explained at the time of that accident, they had a draft emergency procedure for the park. But it was in draft. No one was prepared to sign off on it because there was a lack of clarity of responsibility and braveness to say, yes, this is a procedure one. And it was 160 pages long. It was incomprehensible through length and complexity, and pointing out that a number of the operators and workers work only part-time there or 6 weeks a year in the key holiday season. So there might be backpackers. There's no way they're going to absorb a 160-page emergency procedure, remember it, and actually be drilled to operate and implement it immediately. So it was explained that it was just simply not possible to operationalise the emergency plan that existed at that time. So the executive team had to do a lot of work just to change the structure and the management attitudes within the organisation to actually put in effective procedures, make sure they were trained and drilled and operational, and not theoretical policies and procedures that are lengthy and complex. I think that's a great lesson for all of us safety people. When in doubt, I could sit at my desk and write more stuff on a piece of paper than less. It's actually harder to get key things down to 1 page. It's really hard. But we need to do this, because I think if you said at a ride, an operator would best have 1 page laminated somewhere near the control panel. At best, you'd have 1 page to actually summarise those key things. You could not have 160 pages of clever words that might be technically correct, might be, but no one knows. So there we go. I thought that was good. So make it clear and easy was one of the emphasis. And the senior managers said they spend time, they didn't tell me how much time or how often, but it seemed to be regular, out working with the team. So they'd be in the kitchens at the food serving areas. They'd be with an operator on the rides. They'd be at the back end at the depot with the maintenance and service people. So they understood their problems and their challenges. And this reminds me a lot of Toyota when the factory was operating at Altona that I observed, when executives had a desk out on the production line and spent some time each week out there So when there were problems on the production line, the executives knew what it was about and didn't just say, oh, the workers are silly or the workers are lazy. They actually saw the problem they had assembling cars. So it would appear to me that Dreamworld has picked up some of that, I think, good concept as well. So there we go. One of the other speakers was the well-known safety author, Andrew Hopkins, who had a topic on the 737 MAX aircraft accidents. And he's released a book on this. Well, that's okay. So there were 2 fatal accidents, you may recall, a few years ago. And what he described is that they ultimately found there was one vulnerable device, which was the attitude sensor in those planes that kept pushing the nose down, that the pilots had to fight constantly to stop it driving it into the ground. And ultimately it did on 2 occasions. And Andrew Hopkins attributed this in his words, which is the title of his book, The Perils of Cost-Driven Engineering. Now, as an engineer, what I can tell you is every single product in the world, including every plane, has been built to commercially viable price. There is nothing that survives that's built totally to the maximum engineering and no one can afford it or buy it. So every building, every car, every plane, they've got to be safe for the purpose for which they're designed and built and operated, but you don't put absolutely everything in. So everything is cost-driven engineering. So I thought, so if it's not cost-driven engineering, what was the real problem? And so the real problem is they didn't identify the single point failure. The executives didn't. Engineers knew about it, but yes, he's correct in the sense the engineers knew, but their voice was too soft against the finance people in the business, and additional features were not put into the plane, safety features. The other point I'd like to point out, I came across this some years ago, not every airline buys all the safety features and options on every plane. So you and I think, you've got a brand new Boeing 787 Dreamliner, and all airlines around the world have got them. They are not identical. Some of them have not purchased certain safety options. And from my limited experience, and I'm not here to advocate and sell Qantas, but from my limited experience, I have found that Qantas tends to buy every safety feature that they can reasonably put into planes. And you can imagine there are some low-cost airlines want the lowest cost airliner they can put out there. You sitting in the seat in the plane don't know the difference, but there's a lot of safety features out the back end. So as I said, I'm not here as an advocate for Qantas. I just know from some limited experience, there's been some specific examples I've been involved in, and Qantas had those safety features and other airlines did not. And when you and I buy a motor car, you buy a level of car and you buy options. And so what Andrew Hopkins didn't consider is, did those airlines have an option? Was there an option that they could have purchased and bought? This was not discussed and not raised in the book either. So I just share that with you. Yes, the perils of cost-driven engineering, but be aware there are options you and I can and do buy. It's a car. If you want a safer car, buy the S-Class Mercedes. It has a reputation of the safest standard car available on the market without modification, but it probably starts at $500,000 and almost none of us can afford that. Okay, there's only a handful of people around us in our circle that might actually be in that area. It was also interesting to hear Andrew Hopkins, who's a very good safety technical person, point out that risk assessments have gained too much prominence. And there's lots of organisations I deal with, risk assessment this, risk assessment that. And most of it's irrelevant and a waste of time. And they've got teams working on this for trivial matters. And so he said, no, the key thing is just identify the hazards and control them. And guess what? That is actually written into the Victorian OHS regulations, not to do a risk assessment. The legal requirement is you identify the hazards and you control them. I don't care whether you've got a risk matrix or not. I don't care whether you call it a risk assessment. What we've got to do is those two things. So I thought you might find that interesting. So we're coming up to a half hour, so let's move on quickly, and I'll wrap up in the next few minutes for you. Personal heaters in winter. I've told you the reasons why. I actually have a heater under my desk now. It's not turned on, but I turn it on occasionally if the heating in the office here just goes a little bit cool at certain times of the day. So there we go. So the risks are they tend to get be tripping hazards, either the heater themselves or the leads for them. People can accidentally drop clothing over the top of them, and so the heater can overheat or ignite items. Obviously, electric shock. We've got additional electrical equipment potentially in the building, and if you've got those LP gas heater type, which might be in a warehouse or semi-open area, you've got fumes and/or exposed elements. So, preferred controls. Obviously, if you're going to have people bring them in, you would rather fix. So you would actually probably do that as a company rather than bring portable heaters in. So wall mounted, if you can, no exposed hot elements. So on the right-hand side of the image here is your hot water type heater. At least there is no exposed heated element compared to the one above, where you could have an ignition source or a greater ignition source. And where you've got open flame fueled heaters like LP gas heaters, obviously should only be used in well ventilated areas and in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions. So the final topic before we get to the questions of the week. We find this coming up probably more often than it has in past years. And that is almost if not every week, every month, there's another incident or serious accident involving pedestrians in close proximity to mobile plant. Usually it's a forklift, in this case, a telehandler, in this case, where a company was prosecuted and fined $700,000 for failing to ensure the safety of pedestrians, so enforcing the pedestrian exclusion zone. Unfortunately, in this case, they had a safety spotter. It was a safety spotter who was struck. And so this is an unfortunate case where they had a safety system, the safety spotter, but what the spotter didn't do is either not trained well enough, or the mobile plant operator not enforcing the 3 metre rule, which they've got to do even if there's a safety spotter, simply didn't enforce it. So if you have mobile plant anywhere in your business, or your team go to a place where there is mobile plant, say at a warehouse, truck loading, unloading area, something like that, you need to brief your team on the absolute importance. There's no legislative 3 metre exclusion zone, but it's a good starting point, okay? Because you just start with somewhere and it seems reasonable. A 3 metre exclusion zone. Your team don't go into that zone. And if any of your team are actually operators of plant, they stop even if the pedestrian disobeys the rule. The plant operator stops and refuses to operate until all pedestrians are out of the 3 metre zone. Now, if you think about it, not a single accident will happen with pedestrians if you actually enforce the 3 metre exclusion zone. So this is a good starting point. And of course, we want pedestrians clear where we can. If we're going to have them close by, solid physical barriers are preferred. But if you've got changing environments like at construction sites and some other areas, you just simply have to have this 3 metre exclusion zone, which may be operating around that plant as it moves. So there we go. So question of the week. Do your contractors need PI or PL insurance? Possibly both. But usually public liability is a minimum. So if we have anyone working on our site, the minimum thing you would want is public liability insurance. So if they accidentally do something wrong that injures or damages, causes damage on your premises, that's how they'll respond, because they may not have the money. So you want them to be insured to ensure you can get that. So public liability typically covers situations where the business, that is the contractor or a person coming to work at your installation person, supplier of equipment, has caused damage to a third party. Typically that means you or your business. So professional indemnity insurance is where people give advice, not do physical work. They may do that as well, but if they're giving advice, so these would be typically architects, lawyers, engineers, manufacturers, may not be working on your site doing physical work, but they've given you advice. If that advice is incorrect or incomplete, and it's caused you or your business loss, it's the PI insurance which will respond to that, not the PL, as in public liability insurance. So there we go. So that's part A. So part B, how much coverage? So the general principle is get as much as you can afford to get. That's the general principle I'm told by all good underwriters, insurers and brokers. However, through practicality, what we can tell you is public liability at the moment, most, if I'll call them average businesses, would have 20 million public liability and either $5 or $10 million PI, professional indemnity insurance, if they're giving advice. But if you work in a high-risk industry, I don't know, making aeroplanes or something, so they may want 100 million or 500 million because of the magnitude of the potential losses. But for most businesses are looking for contractors who come onto their premises to have something like $20 million public liability. It was only probably less than 10 years ago, it was only 10 million. So that's how it's creeped up. So that's how much you should be looking for. And are workers covered by your Victorian workers' compensation policy if they travel interstate? And the answer is yes, if they're temporarily working outside of the state. So for Victoria, it's prescribed as they'll provide coverage for up to 6 months out of the state of Victoria. So regular interstate work, periodic overseas travel, that will invariably be covered under that for your workers, and presumably other states will be very similar. So that concludes our session today. We've run a few minutes over. I apologise. It was a big conference. Part 2 of the conference is next month. Andrea's got a sore throat, so thank you for helping out and standing by, Andrea, but you don't have to talk there because we want to save your voice. So thank you for joining us and for your support as always. So I'm Gary Rowe signing off until next month. See you then. Bye.